My husband, Hassan, always jokes that routine is the most underrated luxury of adulthood. He says it every morning while pouring black coffee into his stainless mug, without even looking at me. He thinks routine is proof that life is finally stable. I used to agree. I used to celebrate the reliability of him. But lately, routine has felt like erosion. Nothing dramatic, just static, a slow dissolving of color. We have been married 6 years, and for most of that time, stability felt like the right kind of safety. We built our life carefully. We bought a small house, we saved, we planned. But somewhere in that calculation, I started disappearing. At first only in tiny, almost invisible ways. I stopped wearing lipstick on weekdays. I stopped giving opinions about restaurants. I stopped planning little surprises. I stopped expecting him to ask. Evenings became predictable, him scrolling through emails, industry newsletters, sports scores, small business market trends, anything except the woman sitting across from him. I kept telling myself this was normal married life. That people exaggerate romance in movies. That real marriages are quiet. But then I realized I wasn't disappointed because he stopped doing big romantic gestures. I was disappointed because he stopped even noticing the tiny ones. On Tuesday night, he came home 30 minutes late and barely acknowledged the food I'd cooked. He apologized automatically, without lifting his eyes from his phone, and casually mentioned that his best friend from university, Adnan, might need to stay with us for a night or two because his connecting flight from Dubai got cancelled. He said it like he was informing me that it might rain tomorrow. It barely took a sentence of his attention. I said yes because I always say yes. That has become my role. Smooth everything out, don't interrupt anything, be low maintenance, be convenient. I wondered when exactly I trained myself to respond that way. Adnan arrived the next evening with a single duffel bag and a polite smile. I remember the first odd jolt in my chest. He looked at me when he spoke, and he held eye contact long enough to register the shape of my expression. I couldn't remember the last time a man's eyes paused on my face with that level of awareness. He complimented the smell of dinner, asked how my day was, and listened without interrupting. It felt like such a small courtesy, but the shock of being paid simple attention hit me like an emotional slap. I didn't start the evening wanting anything. I didn't feel underfed emotionally until someone handed me food. Suddenly, my own hunger revealed itself. Later that night, while clearing dishes, I overheard Hassan telling Adnan how solid and easy our marriage was. I stood silently in the kitchen, holding my breath, realizing that in his mind, my silence equaled happiness. And that is how a routine becomes a warning you didn't notice you needed. The first shift happened quietly, with no dramatic spark, no cinematic moment. It was almost midnight, and Hassan had collapsed onto the couch with his laptop still open on his chest, half asleep, half working. I whispered his name once, then twice, but he didn't stir, so I closed the lid gently and placed it on the coffee table. The room felt like a waiting room that had forgotten its purpose. When I walked into the kitchen to wipe the counters, I found Adnan there, drinking water in the dim light. The moment we made eye contact, it felt like we both knew we were entering a territory we weren't supposed to name. He asked how long we'd been married, and I answered. But instead of the shallow, polite conversation people usually have, he asked the kind of questions that open windows you didn't realize you'd sealed. He asked what I missed most about when we first got married. He asked what had changed gradually, not abruptly. He asked if stability ever becomes quiet suffocation. His tone wasn't predatory, and that mattered. He sounded curious, reflective, almost philosophical. He wasn't trying to seduce me, he was trying to understand the shape of marriage from an honest angle. I replied carefully at first, but honesty has a strange momentum. Once it starts, it refuses to stop politely where it should. We talked about fear, not desire. We talked about how adulthood forces you to outsource dreams for security. We talked about how we compromise pieces of ourselves hoping the trade will be worth it. He listened with a concentration that made me feel like my interior world mattered. I had forgotten the last time someone responded to my feelings with anything other than mid-scroll half nods. At one point, he said, "Marriage is a lonely institution unless both people continue trying on purpose." The accuracy of that sentence hit me so hard I had to lean against the counter because my knees actually trembled. It was not attraction, it was recognition. Sometimes recognition is more dangerous than chemistry. We laughed twice at small jokes about our younger selves. The laughter frightened me because it felt alive. It felt like a part of me that had been buried beneath routines and polite silence had suddenly sat up inside me. The kitchen became the most intimate place I'd stood in months, even though we were standing several feet apart, not touching, not flirting, just exchanging truth instead of indifference. When the conversation dipped into a quiet pause, I felt the danger ring out like a silent alarm. So I told myself a sentence that was both lie and shield: this is just talking. But the truth is, something inside me already knew that emotional closeness is the true beginning of betrayal. Physical things happen later. Everything always begins here, two people admitting something aloud that they only ever said privately inside their own heads. And I went to sleep that night knowing I had taken one irreversible step away from who I had been. The next morning, Hassan left earlier than usual, rushing to an urgent meeting. He kissed my cheek distractedly, already mid-sentence in some conversation with his assistant over the phone. The door shut behind him before I could even respond. The house suddenly felt too quiet. Quiet is strange when you have recently tasted being heard. It becomes a space that echoes back the absence of attention. I walked into the living room, and Adnan was already there, sitting on the guest sofa, tying his shoes. He looked up immediately, and once again, he looked at me, not past me or through me. That directness was a mirror I hadn't seen myself in for a long time. He said he wanted to apologize for the depth of last night's conversation. He said he didn't want to disrespect my marriage or cause any tension in the house. His voice was gentle, but it carried a weight that told me he wasn't just being polite. He recognized the line between honesty and danger, and he was naming the border we had almost crossed. I told him he didn't need to apologize, but even as the words left my mouth, I heard the false calm in my voice. I was trying to shrink the emotional gravity of the previous night, but it was too late. Once someone awakens a hunger you didn't realize existed, you cannot unknow it. There was a pause, long, uncomfortable, revealing. Silence between two people who should not be silent together is always louder. In that moment, we both became acutely aware that the thing between us wasn't flirtation. It was unspoken significance. When he stood to leave, he lifted his duffel bag, then paused again. "Take care of yourself," he said, the words slow and intentional. Simple words, ordinary words, but I felt them like a diagnosis. Not, "take care," but, "take care of yourself," as if acknowledging that I had not done that in a long time. He stepped closer to hug goodbye. It was normal, friendly, socially acceptable for two people who considered themselves almost family. But when his arms wrapped around me, I felt the warmth of another human being in a way that I had not felt in months, maybe longer. The hug lasted 1 second too long. That single second shifted everything. When I finally pulled away, I realized the betrayal had already occurred, not in action, but in desire for the feeling to continue. Infidelity, I learned in that moment, begins in the heart, not the body. As he walked out the door, I watched through the window as he waved, then got into his ride. I felt my breath catch in my throat, not because I was losing him, but because a version of myself I had kept locked away had resurfaced in that hug. And I wasn't sure I could ever put her back in the box I had kept her in. The moment the door clicked shut, I understood that my marriage had subtly, quietly shifted. The betrayal lived inside that single prolonged second of touch. When Hassan came home that evening, he was unusually cheerful. His meeting went well, a new contract was approved, and he wanted to celebrate by ordering takeout. He didn't notice the subtle difference in me, or maybe he did and chose not to investigate it. I sat across from him while he scrolled through the menu, and I silently observed the man I vowed to share a life with. I realized I had been waiting for him to choose me, to notice me, to pull me back into the marriage with intention. But marriages don't repair themselves through waiting. Indifference grows aggressively in silent gardens. As he talked about office politics and market shifts, I listened carefully, almost clinically. I wasn't angry at him. I wasn't even blaming him. I was finally acknowledging the truth with calm clarity. intimacy is not a resource you can neglect without consequence. Emotional starvation will lead the body to seek nourishment where it appears. That was my responsibility to understand sooner. Later that night, I went into the guest room and changed the bed sheets, folding them slowly, pressing down the corners with deliberate precision. The room felt haunted by a version of myself I had only discovered yesterday. I could still feel the echo of that extra second from the hug. It lived in my skin, in my memory, in the quiet space between thought and impulse. But I also recognized something important. This wasn't about Adnan himself. He was merely the mirror, the catalyst, the external reminder that I had been starving so silently. I forgot what being seen felt like. I realized that if I confessed, the confession would be more about punishing myself, not healing anything. If I stayed silent, I could turn this moment into a wake-up call instead of a weapon. So I made a choice that wasn't dramatic, but deeply intentional. I would stay. I would repair, not for the image of marriage, not for the fear of loneliness, but because I finally understood what was missing, and I wanted to fight for it with consciousness, rather than autopilot. That night, I sat beside Hassan on the couch without speaking. I placed my hand on his forearm, not dramatically, just gently. He looked up from his phone, slightly startled, as though he had forgotten touch was part of our vocabulary. And in that split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes, awareness, or nostalgia, or maybe guilt that he hadn't been attentive. He locked his phone and placed it face down, fully turning his body to me. It was the first moment of real presence between us in months. I didn't confess. Instead, I made a decision to be honest about the hunger I had buried. I told him I missed us, and that I needed him to meet me in that effort. He listened quietly, and his silence felt like attention again, not avoidance. Infidelity didn't end here with destruction. It ended here as a message. Neglect is a slow betrayal, and the cure is conscious presence, not confession, not punishment, but deliberate rebuilding.